Hello and welcome to Blues Dance World Live! We are here in Nashville, Tennessee at Mo Better Blues. How's everyone doing today? Awesome. Hey guys, I'm Clyde Wright, a blues dancer from Washington, D.C., and joining me on this very lovely stage are Katie Belsky from Los Angeles, California, Aaron Brown from Chicago, Illinois, and our esteemed producer, Andy Lee, also of L.A. Hello, Katie.
Hi, Clyde.
Hello, Aaron.
Hi, Clyde.
Hello, Andy.
Hello.
So, here on Blues Dance World, we discuss the culture of blues dancing in the United States and increasingly abroad. Each and every episode, we feature a main topic, discuss some of the events that we've been recently attending or are about to attend, and as always, Katie Belsky leads us in a discussion of a blues musician and a song, which we call our monthly blues jam. And so, without any further ado, Katie, take us away.
Na 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 na.
Boom, 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 boom.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So right now, Katie is talking in the future about the song that.
By the future, it's like Tuesday.
Yeah. So if you have any ideas of what music Katie should do, we'll take them. Probably going to feature a local Nashville musician. So if you have leads there, we'll totally take them. Al Holbrook was amazing last night. Maybe we can do him. All right. And so now we're going to just go directly into the recording of the main topic. We're also going to discuss the events on offline. We're going to immediately go into main topic, which Katie will start with.
All right, so our topic today is called Romanticism, History, and the Search for Authenticity. And this particular topic came out of reading books like Escaping the Delta and Black Dancing Body, which if you haven't read, you absolutely should, and we'll link it on the website. And really, the thing that we want to say is that we are going to be talking about this, really posing a lot of questions and exploring the themes that we're going to be talking about today. We are not approaching this as authorities of any way, shape, or form, but really just trying to unpack this a little bit and trying to be participants in a conversation. So that being said, when our scene first started this revival, however many years ago, there has been continually a question of what is blues dancing, right? And we've gotten a little bit smarter, we've gotten more resources to really understand this a bit more. But now that we've tacked up a bit, the question that I think is how does our modern scene fit into a historical context? And so if I were to describe our national scene right now, it's collectively, I would say our goal is to recognize and acknowledge and appreciate, really celebrate the historical context of this dance. But I think that there are some struggles as well, and that's what we're going to be exploring today and trying to unpack. So I think a good place to start is with a summary of how our modern blues dance scene came to be.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a bit on our podcast before from different various people, but as a brief summary for anyone who's not really aware of it, it is, in the modern context, it came out of Lindy back in the 90s, early 2000s. People were dancing late nights in slow rooms to blues music, and they're doing like a slow jam, something of like Lindy with something not. And some dancers realized that there must be something that's actually appropriate to be danced to this. And they did the research and they found the experts and they found video footage and historical text and really started to build out a more authentic rendition of dancing to blues music, of doing historically appropriate blues dance. But there's a lot of questions that come out of that, which is that we're trying to recreate something in a lot of ways that kind of passed or just wasn't really being danced very actively anymore. So it's led to, I think, over the last couple of years, especially a bunch of people really struggling with that question of authentic blues dancing and how you approach it.
So I think a good way to kick off a conversation about this topic is to, first of all, describe our personal connection with blues music and blues dancing. And also a thing that is, I think, one of the struggles that we face, which is how to be a good dancer from a technical standpoint, but without looking too polished or too pretty or being outside of the historical aesthetic of the dance. So both Katie and Aaron come from a ballroom background, and they've obviously transitioned into being a successful blues dancer. Katie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So I'll take that first, yeah. So for me, I started with Lindy and quickly got into ballroom and studied ballroom for a number of years. And when I was transitioning into the blues scene, one of my biggest things was really trying to learn how to relax. Because in ballroom, you use a lot more muscles to accomplish things and to hold yourself in certain ways, which we don't necessarily see so much in this dance, right? We talk about a very relaxed aesthetic. We talk about really only using the muscles necessary to accomplish whatever it is. And that's something that I still struggle with in terms of just trying to get to that relaxed aesthetic. And I've been thinking about it more and more. But yeah, so I'd say, Aaron, what is your experience with it?
Yeah, it's something really similar, like trying to relax, trying to just feel the music. And I think another real key distinction is that in ballroom especially, and in a couple other dances, there's a really strict form. Like, this is what you dance when you're a beginner. This is what you learn at this level, and this level, and this level, and so on and so forth. Or here's the set of steps that every beginner should know. And I have struggled a lot with letting go of that and with being okay with being in the music and sort of internalizing the emotion of blues, of the song, of the dance. And another thing that I think has come up for me a lot recently, I'd say the last year or so, is getting comfortable with being, sensual in a dance, being comfortable with it feeling not so, clinical, like you might approach some forms of ballroom or what have you. Like this is a dance that was danced, in basements and houses and in bars. It was people packed into, we talk about this, people packed into juke joints, wall to wall, and a lot of them were going there to hook up with people. Like that was the thing. They were going, it was like a freaking party. It wasn't, I want to go learn how to dance cha-cha, so please teach me all of the bronze level steps, thank you. It was like going out and feeling the music and dancing. And I don't know, that's been an interesting struggle recently, and it goes right back to what you were saying, Clyde, with the technical dancer versus the actually emotionally connecting to the music.
Yeah, I think what Aaron said there, there's a really interesting thing that you said there, which is that in ballroom you have like this very structured set of curriculum, right? It's almost like taking a series of college courses, and you're told exactly what to do. And in blues dancing, I feel like because blues dancing didn't come from that kind of culture, right? You picked up things at a house party or a bar by dancing with your mom or your brother, and so the style of learning is really different there. And we're sort of approaching blues dancing from a slightly more ballroom perspective, right? We don't have that super heavily stylized curriculum, but at the same time, we feature classes on a regular basis at these events that teach you sort of approximately what you would learn in a ballroom class.
But I think it's interesting though, right? So we've created this space to have lessons and things, and I think an interesting, I don't know if dichotomy is the right word necessarily, but I think that in order to be successful, or people who have been successful in this scene, are people who are very technically proficient, right? Like there are certain things that they are able to do and have certain controls over their body, but they still have a kind of janky aesthetic that sort of still same kind of, we're still authentic because we're not clinical, we're not necessarily too polished, we're not too perfect, which I think is a little bit at odds with each other.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a struggle coming from a West Coast swing background where there's a lot of pretty lines and stuff. Like you're not supposed to create those pretty lines, and that's definitely been a struggle for me in the past. So,
but I think in terms of then, if we're thinking about the spaces, right? Because think then about the space that we're in, right? We're on a lovely stage, but we're currently in a university, right? We're in a classroom setting. But in terms of how we talk about the dance, we talk about being in juke joints and bars and things of that nature. And there are those of us who have gone out to bars and danced to live music, but if you think about how our venues are mostly structured nowadays, they're at, some dance studio, right, that has mirrors along the walls, and there's a sound system, and, for DJs to plug into. So my next struggle that I see, and really my next question for you guys is, what is the difference that we're getting between dancing in these sort of ballroom studio, classroom type spaces versus going to a bar and dancing to live blues music?
Yeah, I'm lucky in the sense that in DC we have a 7 days a week live blues venue that you can go to every single night of the week. There's always a house blues band or a traveling musician coming through. And there's a dance floor. It's tiny, but there's a dance floor there. And so I can't speak to the nights where I don't go, but I will often go to this bar, and I'll typically only bring one other person, and we'll start dancing to the music, and no one is dancing to the music until we start. And then a lot of people, like at least invariably 6 or 7 people join in. And what's really interesting to me is that the aesthetic of those people matches pretty closely with what we see at the national level. In fact, very often that aesthetic that you see in these bars is way more quote unquote authentic than you see in like these dance venues that we hold our traditional blues dances in.
So what about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I found like a similar thing. Like it's felt simpler, or I don't know how to put it exactly. Like dancing to live music, there's a push and a pull between like what you're doing and what the band is doing on the floor, and I'll be dancing and then I'll have to stop and maybe sway with my partner because I can't look away from whatever the band is doing because they're so great. And then it's like there's less space. Like doing really crazy showy things is really fun, and sometimes I'll do it just to be like, hey, everyone else, like I know what I'm doing, it's cool. But often I just want to, like groove out there with someone. I don't find myself as performative as I feel I get when I'm dancing at an exchange, or dancing in a competition out at an event.
And I think to add on top of that, so in terms of some of my experiences, for example, when I've been out to Austin, Texas, they have a great live blues scene and they have a few bars there. And I think one of the interesting differences is when we are going to, say, these ballroom studios, these venues, we're going there to dance, but that's not necessarily the case for the public. They're maybe going there to actually see the band and to enjoy the music in that respect. And so I can see why movement might get simplified, because that's not, the inherent purpose to go there is not necessarily to dance. It just sort of is it just happens. It's a byproduct.
Which also puts in the point of like, they have songs that go on for 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's faster, it's not necessarily meant for dancers. And that should be okay with us,
Oh, yeah.
right?
And even on top of that, when the band is done, people leave the floor. They don't stick around for the DJ to, play the few songs between band breaks.
Go grab a beer.
Yeah, they go to the bar and they drink,
Yeah.
which is something that our culture hardly ever does, especially at a.
You're just telling us to drink more, right?
Yeah, we should drink more. No, at a Thursday night venue in Washington, D.C., our Thursday night venue is held at a national park, which it turns out that alcohol is illegal at all national parks, although I think a lot of the times people ignore that.
You are just out in your scene right now.
No, sorry. Let me clarify. DC actually, does a good job of adhering to that law, but I'm saying when you go like camping with your buddies and you go to Yellowstone, I don't know, I've never been.
Is this what
camping
you do
in
in
my life.
Yellowstone?
Yeah, when I go to Yellowstone, I drink. I say party. No, I'm assuming that people do that. I don't like that.
On our next podcast about national parks, I'll get into this.
Side note, do you know that dancing in a national park is considered a form of
Sodomy. True fact. True alternative fact.
Yeah, boo for us.
protesting?
Yeah.
That's what I was
Sorry,
going to
guys.
say.
I think
protesting.
Someone told me that. I feel like it was like Laura Chico, maybe.
Yeah, there's a video.
I think that's what
I think she mentioned that earlier before we recorded the podcast.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Well, with that completely inappropriate segue, I really want to bring it to somewhere slightly more serious, and this is something that I've not had an answer for forever, especially over the last couple of years. But this question of how blues is commodified, and how, in a lot of ways, it's like this question of how do we respectfully approach blues, especially in general as a bunch of white people, and
I'm not white.
well, in general,
Predominant
white, in a way that's not appropriating something and commodifying it or getting it away from its authentic background, which I think is the root of a lot of this sort of conversation that's happening right now.
Yeah, and because I think what our scene at the national level is trying to do, right? We're trying to celebrate, we're trying to learn as much as we can. I think we are appreciating as best we can. We're not taking things at face value, we are digging deeper and really trying to see what this was about, but there is still that struggle, right? Like when, I know from personal experience, when I've read some of these books, there is that kind of floating cloud of white guilt that comes in because this is not from a culture that I was born into. This is something that, I was super into dancing, and so I was like, oh, this is like another dance that I can learn. And then there was just all of this background which I think is something that our scene does a lot better than maybe, say, other scenes, because a lot of dances do have historical backgrounds, but I don't know if, say, the social tango dancer does as much research and as much appreciation as what our scene tries to do.
Yeah, I think one of the just really difficult questions that we have to ask ourselves is like when we, hold these blues dances in these venues, and we expose this type of dancing to a much wider audience that normally wouldn't have learned about it any other way because they don't hang out at places like blues bars. We're clearly making it more accessible. The question is, are we like doing that in a historic and respectful way? And that's like, I agree with Aaron, it's like a really tricky question.
I think we are now. I mean, that's in a sense like when we started blues dancing, or when I got into the scene, it was swing dancing, and then it got a little later, then we're gonna go to this blues party or whatever, and we're gonna slow swing there, and we're gonna try to form it, but when Damon saw actually that, let's kind of actually bring it back to the roots, I think at this point we are trying to be more towards original. I don't know what I'm saying right now, but yeah, we're trying to respect what this dance is. But yeah,
I think the scene is certainly more historically minded than a lot of other social dance scenes.
Yeah.
I go to Malongas semi-regularly in Washington D.C. and I typically take the class beforehand, and I can count the number of times on my hand, which I think is 0.
So you don't even need a hand.
The instructor beforehand has acknowledged the historical context and roots of Argentine tango, even though it clearly has that. But I also think it's kind of interesting, like why. I think people realize that it does, but they feel like it's less important to acknowledge that for some reason. I'm not 100% sure why that is.
Yeah, that's interesting because even in the panel that we had at Mobera before, which was about community building, they actually said that they acknowledge the historical context in kind of during their sort of band break or DJ breaks, which I think was an interesting and really good practice to sort of normalize the fact that this comes from a place and we should know what that place is. But I think then, thinking then about the commodification of it, right? So I think part of that struggle also comes from we're trying to celebrate and appreciate this thing from history, but then how do we innovate in the future? Because dance tends to be a very fluid art. It progresses. If you think about, for example, this is like maybe a horrible example, but if you think about social cha-cha from like the 50s to today, it looks remarkably different. And so the question really is, okay, how do we continue to appreciate the past? How do we continue to celebrate this dance in the historical context it comes from, but still innovating, still pushing to the next level?
I think to kick off this conversation, can we see Katie do a demonstration of social cha-cha?
Social cha-cha.
The 2000s?
Yeah, it's pretty much my arm is up here.
Okay, yeah.
Versus like
All right.
here.
Oh,
Nice.
So-
I'm a little teapot, but
Yeah, so it's the I'm a little teapot versus I'm doing a really dramatic line
Yes.
behind me.
Okay, wow. That was
Nice. There's a little bit more bounce.
But yeah, so if I were to ask this question and try to give an answer myself, I think it comes back to core fundamentals, right? Like if we as a scene fundamentally agree that grounding is an inherent part of the dance, right, because of its African dance roots, then I think even if we are innovating and doing something different, we would still want to keep touching back to, for example, grounding. And so I think having that underlying commonly accepted set of principles of what defines the dance helps us to keep rooted in that sort of thing that we're still trying to do. What about you?
Yeah, for one of the things that I think about in terms of innovation of blues dancing, for me personally as a dancer, is just to simply innovate in terms of my quality of movement. And I don't know if you can really consider that innovation, but it's certainly something that you can get much better at while still maintaining the historical roots of the dance, right? You can do a fishtail in a lot of different ways. The question is, how can you do it better? And that's something that, I'm not particularly...
So when you say better, you just mean like more accurate or more to your own style, or just something that we haven't seen?
Yeah, well, I think all of the above. I mean, there's certainly like, in terms of timing, are you doing it in time to the music and in a musical way? I think that's one way that you can think about it. There's, just like, do you look awkward while you're doing it, or do you look like you're a BAMF? So that's another way. And then different also I think is legit. Like how can you continue to do a fishtail but you like tweak one of the variables of the fishtail, right?
Yeah.
So then let's also think about that in the context of music as well. Because if we think about how music, so for example, the music that, say, people had danced to, however many years ago, it's definitely changed, right? People keep dancing to new music, fresh stuff comes out all the time. But something that we see, I think, a lot in our venues is searching for the past. We focus on a lot more historical blues artists, but maybe not as many modern blues artists, at least in my personal experience. What do you guys think about that?
I agree with that, and I think I remember back when I was a younger dancer, there was some event, I wish I could remember which, just they had a modern blues band and they were amazing and they blew my mind, and I hadn't really danced live music before, and there's something really like electrifying about dancing to a live band and feeling like you're connected to this history, that it's like there are musicians playing today, and you look through their pedigree and it's like, oh, this guy, he played with this person, who played with this person, who played with this person. And also really important just in general, I know this is like slightly veering off, but if we're gonna try and keep blues alive as a genre, people who are playing blues today should be supported. You should be going out and seeing people play at venues, even if you're not going to dance, buy their music, make it worth their while, they being the musicians, to keep playing. But also, for on the dancing side and the innovation side, I think getting to dancing to more modern blues musicians could be a really interesting thing. It might change the way that we as a national dance scene move. I don't know.
I think so, because if you look at other dance scenes, they evolve and innovate along with the musicians that evolve and innovate, right? So if you think about West Coast swing from the 80s to the 2015s, it looks like a basically different dance, right? Because the music is radically different to what we danced to in the 80s. If you go back and watch the videos of West Coast swing dancers in the 80s, it looks like they're basically doing some sort of modified Lindy Hop in a slot to a little bit twangier music, but still swung. And these days, and it was like 150 beats per minute. And these days, it's danced to 80 beats per minute to non-swung music. And there's, a fair number of people in the West Coast community that sort of wish they could bring back those golden times of West Coast swing, where they're upset that people dance to different music. But the community has sort of, taken in this ride and modified the aesthetic and the quality of movement and the types of movement that they're doing to that music. And I think it is absolutely the case that if you listen to blues music from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and then compare it to today's blues music, it's radically different.
Oh, yeah.
Same genre, but the feel of the music is going to be different, right? And I think a lot of the ways that we as a scene can innovate is by, just not only digging deeper into the varying genres, because even if you look at like the 60s, there's a huge evolution in the 60s, and then also there's a lot of different, when things evolve, like it's not like the old stuff dies, right? That stuff continues on, but you just have new forms. And so one thing is to continue digging into those forms, but the other thing is like see, what blues musicians are doing in 2015.
2017.
Or yeah. I don't even know what
Today even.
Today.
Yeah, even last night at this venue.
Last night was actually a perfect example of a blues musician that definitely doesn't sound like blues from the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, but he was amazing. I mean, the whole band was amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of blues artists here, we're going to listen to Brother Youssef tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think we found him? Somebody got a hold of his CD, really at Downtown Disney. He was playing there, and we got in there and we're like, oh, this is awesome. We'll dance a few dances. We got one of his CDs and started DJing it, and it just started spreading around. And then he jumped into the blues events. I was like, I would never expect to see him there because I only saw him in Downtown Disney.
Yeah.
I think
It's crazy.
Yeah, but to bring it back to the point that you were talking about in terms of music from 20s, 30s, 40s, etc. Even if you look at one song, and we've seen this a few times, right, where even the same song, people do different versions of it, and people have done maybe the original version back in the 20s and 30s, and think about how people are covering it in every sort of decade or so, and it really, even if the artist is trying to make it their own, I think it also sort of exemplifies the technology and kind of the spirit of the culture at the time as well, which is an interesting thing when we're thinking about music. But something though that you were saying before in terms of digging in deeper, I think even in our own scene, we've seen more digging in deeper, right?
Sure.
Like strutting and Latin blues were not really things our national scene put words to until not fairly long ago.
2011,
Yeah.
20...
Maybe even sooner than that.
Yeah.
Well, strutting was not on the lips
radar?
of.
Yeah.
Well, I think people were dancing it, but they weren't necessarily calling it that. I think people like Damon were calling it that, but a lot of people didn't really know what it was called until Damon said, "Hey, this is the thing. It's strutting."
Right, and
Right.
now we have an actual event that is completely dedicated to
Yeah,
strutting.
exactly.
How
Yeah.
much has that grown?
No, it's absolutely the case that one bit of evolution that's happened in the scene is that, the tempos have increased. And I think you see this in other scenes as well. People kind of get bored with the same old, and they want to try something new, and dancing to faster music is definitely a cool way to change one variable while keeping everything else the same. And then, you definitely saw Blue Shout in 2011, I think. 2011 do the fast dance comp, which didn't bring about the term strutting, to the national scene, but it certainly brought the concept of fast dancing up to the national scene.
Yeah.
So Trini's probably gonna oopsie poodle you some point.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll make sure to have Sarah listen to this episode.
Oh yeah, no, it's probably like 2012. I don't know.
Whatever.
Yeah, one of the Sarahs will fact check us.
Yeah. Aha.
Oh,
But I think one of the other things as well that we're thinking about in terms of innovating it is because as we've been thinking about this question of like what is blues dancing, what is not blues dancing, we've been really able to distill a little bit more by saying what it's not. So I think in a weird way it's kind of like that dancing in boxes exercise where you're sort of controlling for certain variables. So like how do you create within that context?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell us about Tim's cake.
That is amazing segue.
yeah.
So this is going back to the core fundamentals idea, which I believe in. And so Tim O'Neill, who's one of the instructors here at Milbetta, you should take his classes if you can. Tim is not paying me to say
This
this.
podcast is not
It's
sponsored
not
by
sponsored by Tim O'Neill.
Tim O'Neill.
But there was something that he used to say in his classes years ago. I don't know if he still says it now. But it was this idea of, if we're talking about core fundamentals, blues dancing, there's a certain recipe for blues dancing, right? It's grounding, pulse, relaxed aesthetic, isolated, whatever they were. But the idea is that, the sort of analogy, and take it with a grain of salt, is that if you are baking a cake, for example, you need specific ingredients in order to bake it, in order for it to be called a cake. So if you start switching out the ingredients, it's not necessarily that it's not going to be a delicious and equally valuable thing. It's just maybe you don't call it a cake. Maybe it's a muffin, or maybe, I don't know enough about baking, but like
It'll be like a flourless
maybe it's a
chocolate
stone.
cake.
Yeah, maybe it's like a lava cake.
It's
I don't know.
gluten-free.
It's gluten-free.
Yeah.
I don't know. Flour, whatever. But the point is that and maybe that's kind of a question as well for you guys in terms of we have a whole bunch of different scenes around the country and now around the world, and I wonder, like, do we all sort of value a common set of the same things?
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you, for example, go to the Pacific Northwest versus the East Coast versus the South, the dances look kind of different.
Yeah, well,
for sure.
I would just say I had a moment of it feeling like we were baking the same cake, which was pretty cool. Which is, I was teaching a tiny weekend workshop with Sarah Cherney in Chicago, and we got together the lesson plan, and when we would talk about things, we used the same language. And we both had this moment of, oh, this is really cool that me, like I've been on the West Coast dancing my whole life, and then I can come out to Chicago and lesson plan with someone who I've never taught with before, and realize that we're speaking the same language, or at least we're baking the same sort of cake.
You put the same bun in the same oven.
Yeah, let's go with that one. That's another oopsie poodle for Sarah to correct.
I'll have Sarah back as a special guest.
It was definitely all Sarah putting the bun.
Yeah, so
in
the
there.
next Sarah Cherney episode will be Sarah chastising Clyde for an hour.
I wouldn't find that entertaining.
I mean, that sounds like thrilling to me, but I'm into that sort of thing.
That's the romanticism part of this podcast.
Chastise me.
I can only hope the mic is picking up all the after.
What were we talking about?
We're talking about Tim's cake and then it just got derailed.
There's something there. I can't remember what it is.
Core fundamentals.
I know what I was going to say. So what I will say is that, yeah, I think that there's definitely a diversity of values throughout the United States, and I know that because, for instance, I'll meet a follow, say, on the East Coast, and then maybe she'll move out to the West Coast, and then I'll travel around and I'll be visiting that West Coast city, and I'll see that person that I haven't seen for a couple of years, and I'll dance with her, and she'll be like, "Oh, you're dancing like I used to dance in DC. Like this is the DC feel or thing for blues." I don't know. But there's like clearly a familiarity that she has not had for a while, and I think that's always interesting to hear, like, oh, like describe, like, what is it that DC feels like versus, you know, Seattle or wherever, right?
Is it like McDonald's, where all of them should have the same?
The franchise.
Yeah. Like McDonald's should have all the same Big Macs, but if you go to McDonald's in Japan, they'll have a completely different menu.
Right.
They'll still have fries, they'll still have Cokes, they'll still have Big Macs, but man, there's some different flavored desserts and whatnot.
Right.
Yeah.
Clyde is the McRib
Right.
of the blues scene.
I'm the McRib.
Yeah.
You can only get me on odd numbered months and
Oh.
even numbered years. It's very confusing.
And then, of course, it goes away for a while, and there's enough time to forget
Miss me.
just exactly how questionable it was.
Oh man, too real.
You wake up in the morning, you really regret that McRib.
But okay, so then interesting question for you, right? Dancing with this familiar follow, did I assume her pronouns, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but did she feel different to you having been on dancing on the different coast?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I don't. Well, first of all, this person that exists in my mind probably is actually multiple people, and then I just can't really remember who they are, so I just meld them all together. So this is like faceless follow that may or may not be she, her pronouns, but they possibly are. I have no idea. But second of all, yeah, like I can't quite remember if they felt any different. But that's the thing. It's like you go over to these other scenes, and then you're dancing with that flavor for years, right? I think that's going to change you regardless of whether you want it to or not. And so what I would say is, yeah, they probably felt like all of the other people in that scene, in as much as that there's a homogenous feel of a scene, which I also don't 100% buy into. Partially because, you know, blues, a lot of blues dancers come from a bunch of different backgrounds. And I think that's one of the really fun things about blues dancing is that you get to experience all these dancers with different backgrounds, and you have to sort of negotiate that thing that you're talking about in dance terms in real time. Like you don't get any practice dancing with a blues dancer that's come from a tango background or whatever. But I can't remember. I do think that Seattle dancers definitely look and feel different than DC dancers, for sure. You live on the West Coast, so I don't know. What do you think about when you travel to the East Coast? What do you think?
Well, it's so interesting because in my sort of personal dancing right now, I feel like I am traveling more to dance than I'm actually staying at home to dance.
True that.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of my dance experience is with the national folk.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm a fair comparison, but Aaron, considering you moved recently from Los Angeles, sorry to put the mic back on you, buddy, to go from Los Angeles to Chicago, and especially because, you know, the live music out in Chicago is so much more present and a much bigger influence than, say, in Los Angeles.
That's I
know.
don't know. That's a hard question. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Sorry if you can't see it all the
there's
people
some Chicago
listening, but
people who are going to be
who just
very
demanded that I
much,
answer it correctly.
There's some Chicago people here who will oopsie poo.
That's right. I had to make a correction that they're all better. No. I think what I've found is there's more like foundational. So people on the West Coast dance in a more expressive way than I've found people, and this is a big generalization, people in the Midwest. So when I'm dancing with new dancers in Chicago, really, really solid, really easy to dance with. I'll do really silly, crazy things, and then they'll be a little like, what are you doing? This makes me nervous. The difference is I'll be in Los Angeles or San Francisco, and I'll dance with someone, and I'll do foundational things, and the person's like, I'm gonna dip myself. or that's a big range. It's more like I'm gonna do like crazy cool things, and so that's what I would say would be like the different flavor. But you can find both in both places, and I think you can find a similarity of blues aesthetic and technique in both places.
I have to say, not now, but maybe a few years back. Yeah, they have. I have to say, a few years ago, the LA scene was more move-based. It was more, if I can do this pop turn, whatever. But it was all about moves. Then we saw what the East Coasters were doing, which was more of a conversational type of dance. That's awesome. So we saw that, and when we're trying to bring it to the West Coast, I don't know how successful we are, but we're trying.
Yeah.
And then like how I felt in Korea, oh man, like I think the influences that I see there is a lot of styles of Damon and Yeongdong. I can see that in all the other dancers. And the other thing is they love performances, so they're also really big in their movements.
Yeah, but
So there.
And I think that's interesting, right? If we're thinking even just in the innovation of this dance, we have gotten a lot more performative. We've opened up a lot more rather than keeping it kind of simple and sort of, I guess, internal maybe is the right word. But I do think that there is a little bit of a push to get back to more simplistic roots.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to what Aaron was saying about when you go to a blues bar, you don't have a lot of room. There's typically maybe, 4 or 5 other couples on the dance floor, on a very small dance floor, and there's not a lot of room to do stuff. And I'm assuming that is much more historically how it was, right? So there's not a stage that you can do like crazy, huge, big movements and expressive movements. There's just like you and your partner in a very tiny box. And I do think it's an interesting, like, people, the artists of the blues dance community trying to like figure out how you translate what has historically been a very intimate dance into something where you're, to use a metaphor from my favorite film, Twilight Breaking Down Part 4, where you can somehow expand out that emotional connection with not just you and your partner, but like the entire audience, because that's what Bella did in the Breaking Down Part 4. Sorry, guys. I think it's like really interesting to watch that innovation happen at the highest levels of the dance.
Yeah.
I think my kind of almost, not final question, but my thought is, so what would you want to see? We're kind of thinking about these questions, we're talking about it more. What would you want to see for either your local scene or for the national scene?
I think I want to see people getting away, and this is going to sound weird as someone who teaches dance, but people getting away from the thought of having to get things right, and getting more towards the thought of dancing to the music and being connected. And I mean, this is like for myself. I'm like, this is like little Aaron, listen to this again and remind yourself, like, don't worry about getting it right, just be there, like, know that you know the things and just be in the moment and in the music.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently as a dancer is that how it's very easy to fall into like a set of things that you do, and how can you better, like in real time, react to the music that you're listening to with a partner, and maintain that.
What you all are saying, where the dancing and not the like, this is how you do a fishtail, you move to the side and go down and back up, but actual being in that
That's
group.
what I say to myself every time I do a fish.
Down, over, up.
Get tight shoes.
Because it's weird, right? Because, we want to make this accessible to people, and it's really weird because I would almost want that more simplistic dance to be the dance that is, quote, successful. But then sort of like do we teach that? How do you teach that? It opens up kind of a flood more of questions. I think I want to see even more people, and especially in the local scenes, do more of the research. I think.
What kind of research, per se?
I think in terms of, I think at the national scene, the people who are already traveling and who are already invested in it, they are already doing that research work and that appreciation of looking into blues artists and understanding the culture and reading the books and all those kind of things. But in terms of our local scenes, that's maybe not happening as much, and that might just be exposure, that might be time, resources, etc. It's hard to say. I would love for that, and that we essentially have a common understanding of what blues is.
So you're going to be leading an LA little group that teaches blues. Is that what you're saying, Katie, for the podcast and to everybody else in our audience?
Is this your commitment? Is this your promise?
Katie, do not do it. Don't do it. Make Andy organize it. And it is on you now.
I think I need to get through my financial audit first for my company before I can do anything else right now. But no, I mean, even just doing something small, like having, say, listening parties. And I mean, that's really kind of why I really like doing the monthly blues jam, is that it gives me more opportunities and more of an excuse to dig deeper and then share that knowledge with other people.
Cool.
I'll have a film thing. I'll have a blues film thing. That'll be my contribution.
There you go.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, take it away.
Sure. My name's Lainey Barha. I'm from Minneapolis. And I had to hold so many words in this whole hour.
You're wrong. You're wrong. That was bad.
I definitely was gauging how well I was speaking by what your face was doing, so.
So the thing that I'm going to pick, though, is what was most relevant to this recent topic of people in local scenes doing more research and doing more education. Because as a local scene organizer, I have to recognize that not everybody is going to nerd out about this stuff as much as a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think there is room for me, certainly as an organizer, but also other organizers, to empower their community members to pick a facet. There's so much that and so many ways that you can learn about this stuff. So you could try to become a DJ and start learning about the music and start listening to both historical stuff and what is currently happening in the blues music sphere. You could start reading books if reading books is your thing. You could dig on YouTube for video clips. But
That's my department.
yeah, pointing people in more specific directions so that people can tailor to what they're actually interested in doing.
Yeah.
So that's just a thing that I want to do in my scene.
Cool.
It's really good.
Yeah.
But, and that being said, that fits into me with this theme of how we as a scene fit into historical context. In order to, all artists do this, right? If you're trying to make art, you have to know what's come before.
Yeah.
If you're trying to make something that's new and interesting and still relevant, you have to be educated about the history, about who's come before you and what's already been done before you can do something new that's meaningful.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I would I think that's kind of where our scene is at and where I would like us to continue to go.
Yeah.
Yay. Cross-training blues will happen.
Yeah. Also,
Lainey will run it.
that just reminded me of something which my old collegiate scene does. And I can't take any credit for this because they did it on their own. But they have a small lending library. So they've got 5 or 6 books, pretty good books on the history of the blues, and you can just come and borrow one and read it if you
That's
want.
a freaking great idea.
I know, it's such a
All
cool
scenes
idea.
need their own lending library.
It's
Where
a
you
really
just
cool start.
yeah, it's just
Done.
DC done.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, any more? Go for it.
And tell us who you are.
Yeah, what's in your from?
Hi, Jessica.
I'm Jess from DC.
Hey.
Hi, Jess from
Yeah, from the Midwest, so I made it out to civilization. My question is more on the economics and history of it. Can y'all hear me? Being that blues is started from the post-slavery world and the people doing it didn't have a lot of money, I'm just wondering how we equate that with our attending and going to events that are $150 or more.
Yeah.
So how does that play in with the historical context compared to now?
That's a great
That's
question.
a really good question.
I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Well,
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I would say when you look at national events, it definitely feels strange. Like, you know, you pay $100, $150 to go, also pay another $200 to fly to a place, and maybe another like $75 to or $100 to stay somewhere. Like, there's these costs feel weird. I will say, in my experience, at least people who are organizing national events are probably losing money.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
but that doesn't, there is still that real interesting question of accessibility. I know some organizers are grappling with that. I know there are people who do like, as low a tiers, they do like as cheap as possible tier, and then you can, or a higher tier, and you pay for the higher one if you can, which means that people who don't have as much money are more able to get into the event, or there's scholarships that some organizations put up.
Volunteering.
I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah,
So here-
Here's my thing. I would say that back then it was like they go to dance and then afterwards they go to these juke joints and whatnot. I mean, in a sense, wouldn't that be like a house party? And in doing so, like, I think house parties would be that originator, and thus if you have one, that would kind of represent what it was being back then. That would help. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if that's true. I don't know.
I mean, there's a there's rent parties. That's a historical
Yeah.
context for it, but it's still there's the question of
And with the cost of everything now, is that maybe why the scenes are a little, and the national scene is a little bit less diverse in terms of socioeconomic standards?
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
But I think scholarships are probably a good answer to that, and I think we just heard a Blues Geek topic that it touched on scholarships. So I think there are scenes that are trying to address that. It's like, you know, probably something we should.
I don't, no, it's good. I
Yeah,
think
good.
kind of, no, it's a great question. I don't think there might be a way to equate it. Really
Yeah.
is maybe the answer. Because if you think about what we're doing today, there's not really, other than the appreciation and the name and some of those things that we've already talked about, you know, the dance we're doing today is not the dance that was being done back then. And that might just be something you have to be okay with.
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions? We are almost out of time, but we can take one more.
Or just comments. It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be about
or
this, it
just
could be about anything.
tell us what you
Or
hated.
people have like things they want to say about what's her face?
I think Laura
was it-
Chieko. maybe?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think that's
That's
we're
like
good.
on that note.
on that note, well, thank you. Thanks so much for the audience for joining us and thinking about these questions and asking us questions. Thank you so much, in particular, to Paul Fryer, who helped out with our soundboard and did some mixing. Woo! Paul, thank you. And of course, thank you to Kenneth Ship and the entire Mo Better Blues organizing staff. This was really Kenneth's idea and brainchild, and he asked us to come out here and do this, and I'm super, super happy that he did, because I had a blast, and I hope everyone else did too.
Yep.
So, with that, we are going to take it.
yeah,
Do I have
so
a
What's the
exit?
hashtag?
The hashtag, so the hashtag is the hashtag MBB17. But if you weren't able to join us at the event, but you want to talk more about this topic, you can totally write in to us with your thoughts. Our email is bluesdanceworld@gmail.com. You can also find our episode information at
bluesdanceworld.com, and also on our Facebook page,
And
And-
Facebook and iTunes and
and iTunes and Stitcher. And yeah, the thing I will ask, we always say rate and review. It does really help. It really would help us out a lot, and especially for all the stuff that goes into it. So if you could, that'd be great.
Yeah.
This-
And I'd say,
Clyde's mom needs more reviews.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
This episode will be live
Beginning of March.
March 1st.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hopefully.
yeah.
And with that, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Yay.